4 days have passed since Kenya's youth erupted in one of the most intense waves of protests in recent history. Across Nairobi and beyond, streets once bustling with life were turned into scenes of unrest, looting, and heartbreak. Tonight, on 4US Africa, we take a deep dive into the Gen Z protests that shook the nation, exploring what ignited the flames of dissent, how these protests unfolded, and the devastating aftermath that continues to grip Kenya. The protests began on June 25, 2025, marking the anniversary of last year's anti-tax protests. But this time, the anger was even more raw and urgent. The immediate trigger was the tragic death of blogger Albert Ojwang, who died in police custody, a death many believed was preventable and emblematic of a broken justice system. For many young Kenyans, this was the last straw. Decades of police brutality, economic hardship, and political neglect boiled over.
We have security officers that have condoned, barricaded the venue that we were supposed to initiate and begin our peaceful demonstration calling for justice for the late Albert Ojwang. We are here today to beseech you and uphold the constitution that the security apparatus are trying to subvert.
In a digital age, Gen Z uses every tool at their disposal. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and WhatsApp became rallying points. The protests were decentralized but powerful, coordinated through viral hashtags and instant messaging groups. Young people organized marches in 23 countries, blocked roads, and gathered at strategic locations to demand change. Their message was clear: no more injustice. No more silence. But what began as a cry for justice soon spiraled into violence. Reports came in of confrontations between protesters and police, many involving live ammunition. Human rights groups confirmed at least 16 deaths, most caused by gunfire. Hospitals struggled as hundreds were admitted with injuries, some life-threatening. Alongside the tragic loss of life was widespread destruction. In Nairobi alone, dozens of shops were looted, some losing millions in stock. Several buildings, including police stations and county offices, were set ablaze. Beyond Nairobi, destruction stretched to towns like Naivasha, Kisii, and Molo. Families found their livelihoods shattered in a matter of hours. "I lost everything in a few minutes," says one business owner. "My shop was my only income. Now I don't know how I will survive." Many echoed this despair, their pain compounded by a sense that criminals hijacked what should have been peaceful protests.
generation. Ikago, tangu mamangu alizaini, ile breki kamo, uraga hoyaga kajugo kula kamuri. Na ndikoka yine kuhoyaga, oto kwenye kedo makini. Kama Mungu wewe ndio ninaombaga, na unajua kabisa, hivyo kwenye hoyaga, na ndepiwa, Mungu niwezeshe, kiamu na ingine, uona uoguga. Sina nguvu, sina hinya na vile na hofu. Ndani nimefolea kwa bedroom. Na chama ninachukuliana kama anaitwa Julia.
Authorities have accused organized gangs, hired goons, of infiltrating protests to loot and cause chaos. Videos surfaced showing masked men with weapons ransacking supermarkets and hotels, intensifying fears and confusion on the streets. The political fallout has been intense. President William Ruto condemned the violence, urging calm and peaceful dialogue, but he also defended the police's tough response.
And I want to express my deepest regret for the loss of lives, looting and wanton destruction, and loss of valuable property belonging to our traders who were deliberately targeted by criminal elements during the protests this week. Besides the regrettable loss of lives, the biggest victims of this chaos were our hard-working traders and entrepreneurs who wake up early every day to find some of their businesses and hustles reduced to ashes, and others with broken doors and empty walls or empty stalls. Let me say this. The right to peaceful protest is protected by a constitution. We respect and uphold that right. But what we witnessed was not peaceful protest. It was calculated chaos. It was violence. It was destruction. And it was economic sabotage. Let's call it what it is. That is what it was. Shops were looted. Businesses, some built over decades, were burnt to the ground. Market stalls destroyed. Warehouses ransacked. Investments worth billions of shillings wiped out in hours. The livelihoods of hard-working Kenyans have been shattered by deliberate acts of lawlessness. It is anarchy dressed in freedom colors. This is disorder disguised as democracy.
Interior Minister Kipchumba Murkomen described the protests as a coup attempt and promised swift arrests of looters.
This was not just violence. It was an orchestrated campaign of terror, an assault on our people, our constitution, our institutions, our values, and the very soul of this republic. What was billed as a peaceful protest was in truth a calculated disguise, a coordinated descent into chaos marked as civic expression, masked as civic expression. Beneath the banner of democratic rights, we witnessed a well-orchestrated campaign of political violence. What happened was not spontaneous. It was not random. It was deliberate, it was coordinated, it was funded, and it was premeditated and politically instigated. So this is nothing to do with protests. This is nothing to do with freedom of expression. It was an unconstitutional attempt to change the regime of this republic. And this is therefore, yesterday what the police did to foil was they were able to foil an attempted coup.
Meanwhile, Opposition MPs called for the arrest of Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, alleging he financed groups to sabotage the protests and spread chaos.
Is a dark man with a very dark heart, very black heart. I dare say today, Honorable Speaker, in this House, Honorable Rigathi Gachagua is the one who directed goons he mobilized to go and murder my parents, destroy my property in Kikuyu, destroy the property of the people of Kikuyu in the name of revenge. Honorable Speaker, we cannot build a country that way. That is why, Honorable Speaker, we are asking the Inspector General of Police. It cannot rest at this. Nobody, not Kimani Ichung'wah, not Rigathi Gachagua, not the sitting members of Parliament in this House, Honorable Speaker, who are doing this work, and some 2 senators, Honorable Speaker. And as Honorable Junaid Mohammed has said, if you look at the trajectory of violence and destruction that visited, you can associate that violence with a particular politician and the area they come from and the kind of thuggery that was going on, Honorable Speaker. So as we condemn, Honorable Speaker, let us call on the Inspector General of Police and the Director of Criminal Investigations.
During the height of the protests, the government issued a directive to all media houses to stop live coverage of the demonstrations.
There is nothing wrong with live broadcast per se, because we also, our media enjoys freedom. We have the freedom of media in this country. The biggest problem with live broadcasting, having watched a number of them, media stations yesterday, is the idea that media becomes the center of mobilization for some of these protesters. In fact, most of the media houses are working very hard during the onset of protest, telling people, oh yeah, wengine wamekuja, sasa tayari ndio hawa. They interviewing people in the street and tell them, what do you tell those who are still at home? You see, they are participating, directly in mobilizing people to come. But what was even of greater concern to me is some of the media stations whose their job was directing the protesters. And they are saying, oh, now they are in Thika Road. As soon as they converge with the ones in Kiambu Road, the possibility is that they will pass through Museum and State House will be very near. You see, that is really very irresponsible journalism. Of course, the gentleman from Standard knows that Standard now has stopped being a newspaper. The headlines for the last 2 months or 3 months have always been about security and insulting people without resorting at one instance.
This sparked outrage from opposition leaders, with former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua calling it a deliberate attempt by President Ruto to shield goons allegedly hired to infiltrate the protests and incite violence.
That switching off the live stream was done deliberately so that the looting is not recorded, so that the goons are not recorded. I have told you it was such scheme by William Ruto and Kipchumba Murkomen, and that is why the media had to be switched off. And I want to tell William Ruto, please don't take us back to the 80s during the Moi era. William Ruto, kindly, we are in 2025. How do you interfere with media freedom? The media freedom is a basic freedom that is well entrenched in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Despite clear evidence of these organized groups looting and destroying property, no arrests have been made. This raises a critical question. Why, even days later, have authorities failed to apprehend those responsible? Is there a deeper political motive behind this silence, or is the justice system simply unable or unwilling to act?
That goons had been paid by Rigathi Gachagua or anybody else. Why didn't they arrest these goons? If these were my goons, I want to tell you, Michelle, today they would have been shot dead. They would be in custody. Why, if they had intelligence that Rigathi Gachagua or anybody else for that matter had paid goons to come and cause chaos in Nairobi, why didn't they act on that intelligence? Why did they supervise the goons wreaking havoc in the streets of Nairobi? How did they allow goons to go to a police station unarmed and take over a police station? If you see goons in a police vehicle, who owns that police vehicle? That is the state. If you see goons wreaking havoc and police are just watching, you don't need rocket science to know who has sponsored the goons. You know, if goons are wreaking havoc the whole day and none has been arrested, it's obvious who has brought those goons, because the government cannot arrest their own goons. If these goons were brought by the opposition, as they are alleging, Michelle, all of them would be custody, they would be in court. But these goons have not been arrested, and they cannot be arrested because they were brought by the state.
DCI does not investigate politics. He will only deal with the criminals. And those criminals will be caught. They invaded a police station, the shops, they provided financial support to chaos. Criminals paid them, ferried them. The matatus that were used to ferry them, some of the vehicles that were operating pretending to be ambulances, but they were ferrying goons. All of them are going to be ensured that they have been mopped up, and all those people be arrested and charged. And as I said, it is up to now the next stage, the DPP and the judiciary, to take the next stage.
Political analysts warn that these protests reflect deep divisions in Kenyan society, not only over governance, but over generational expectations and economic realities. The youth are demanding more than just change at the ballot box. They seek an end to systemic injustice that has plagued their lives. As Kenya begins to pick up the pieces, many wonder what comes next. Will these protests be a turning point, sparking reforms and healing, or will the cycle of unrest continue? For Kenya's Gen Z, the fight for justice has only just begun. This has been For Us Africa, the true African voice, bringing you stories that matter. Stay informed, stay hopeful, and together we can build a better future.